When we looked at how institutions work together with providers of resources for teaching and research, we realized that traditional data protection models didn't fit. Where multiple parties are involved in providing a service, data protection normally treats one of them as taking primary responsibility, the data controller, and deciding which others, data processors, to subcontract to. This is the model by which many universities outsource their provision of email, for example. But for teaching resources, it's more complicated. The student often goes directly to a service provider, such as an online journal. Using technologies such as the Security Assertion Markup Language, SAML, the service provider tells the student they need to be authenticated by their institution, or perhaps by a social network. The service provider can then obtain from the institution sufficient information to decide whether the student is covered by the institution's license. In research, it may be even more complicated, as the allocation of access to major facilities such as telescopes, synchrotrons, or genetic databases may well be done by research groups rather than institutions. So how can we fit this within the General Data Protection Regulation? It's pretty clear that all participants are now autonomous data controllers, deciding independently what information to request and release to help the user get access to the resources they need. But each data controller needs a legal basis for that processing, and consent doesn't work because it's only valid if given freely, which will not be the case for employees and may not be the case for students. And conversely, necessary for contract won't work, because we would like both students and researchers to read more widely than what is just necessary. Using these bases would also require the institution, service provider, and possibly research project to agree which basis applied to each transaction, and we definitely don't want to design and implement a technical protocol for that. Fortunately, there's a simpler option. Each of the parties knows that the individual has asked them to provide some service, so it seems reasonable to conclude that each one has a legitimate interest in doing what is necessary to provide that service. The legitimate interests basis has two additional requirements, which provide extra protection to users. Each data controller must assess and minimize the risks of their processing, for example of disclosing information about the user, and must ensure the remaining risks are justified by the benefits the user is likely to receive. Critically, each data controller can make this assessment independently. It does not need to discuss every transaction with its peers. And, under the GDPR, legitimate interests can be used for releasing personal data to service providers outside Europe, so we can apply a common legal framework across all research and education institutions and services. A lot of work has been done internationally to help data controllers meet their requirements. First, there is a standard set of attributes, which lets service providers and institutions meet their obligations for data minimization. These include opaque pseudonyms, so services can recognize returning users to save information between sessions, for example, but cannot identify them, and declarations of the relationship with the institution, so student at here has a standard meaning, at least to the same extent as it does in the physical world. Just releasing those two should be enough for most site licenses. Entity categories help assess the risk-benefit balance to services that need more information. The research and scholarship category can be used to release non-opaque, real-world identity to services such as research group management that need that information, will protect it, and where the benefit to the individual researcher is high. And federation agreements provide a shared, legally binding commitment to provide accurate information, to only use it for the required duration and purpose, to keep it secure, and to provide mutual assistance in resolving problems. After operating this framework for several years, to provide access to resources including wireless networks, high-performance computers, and online journals, we're confident that it protects the interests of users, service providers, and institutions.